My name is John. I'm the owner of 8-Ball Camera Support, and I've been having a lot of requests for cleaning instructions. So I have a few customers that every once in a while will send me back a slider that they've had out in the desert or out in the sand dunes that is really dirty, and they don't feel comfortable cleaning it. So I'm going to take the slider that was sent to me. I think it ended up in the New Mexico desert in the sand dunes. It's really dirty. It's full of sand. The bearing tracks don't like sand. If you run it in the sand, you're going to ruin the bearings, and it's going to cost you a bunch of money. It's not the death of the slider. Simply replace the bearing tracks. It's a brand new slider. So what I'm going to do is naturally flip this thing over. We need to get rid of the base plate. The base plate, you'd use a 5/16 Allen wrench. And all we're going to do is just undo this. We're going to get this out of the way. I'll have to check it and see whether or not we even need to take that all apart, whether it got dirt and sand in there. So 5/16 Allen wrench takes that off. As you can see, I'm not in a fancy studio. I'm not some handsome person taking this thing apart. I am actually the one who designed it. I machine it, and I assemble each one of these sliders myself, one at a time. So this is my shop. This is where I work, and so this is where I'm going to clean it. What we'll need to do, handy dandy pair of pliers. Take the little brake off here, the little brake knob. And just so while we're talking about this the dampener brake knob, finger tight. All this does is simply move the dampener. Finger tight is as tight as it needs to be. I get some guys that crank that thing down and they start bending stuff. Proper tools for the proper job. Take this little knob off. That way there it's going to allow me to take this saddle plate off. So what we're going to do next is 3/16 Allen wrench. I built this thing so that it anybody can disassemble it. Don't be afraid of taking it apart. There's nothing special about it. There's nothing you're going to hurt on it. I built it so anybody could take it apart. Basically your saddle plate with your magnetic stops. Put that back there on the chair. As you can see, the amount of dirt. It's clear full of sand all over in the bearing tracks. I don't even really want to move it, simply because it's you start running a bearing over sand and you start ruining it. I'm hoping that it didn't ruin the bearing tracks, but we won't know until we find out. Take it apart. 5/32 Allen. We'll take these bearing blocks off of here. And now, just so you know, this is kind of an extreme takedown for cleaning. That's kind of weird. It's got a clicking noise in it. Normally you can take some lacquer thinner on a rag and wipe the bearing tracks down. Put a little oil on them, and it's like brand new. So normally you don't have to do this. There again, 5/16 for the bottom plate, 5/32, the little green one, for the bearing blocks, 3/16 for the top saddle plate, 3/16 for the end caps. And when you pop the end caps off, sometimes on the screw itself, when you actually get them to break loose, you're going to notice that it's going to throw a spark. That's simply a hard anodizing up against a bolt, a steel bolt. It's going to smell like sulfur, like you lit a match. And you're going to see a spark. It's perfectly normal. Like this. We're going to take the end caps off. Oh, crap, this thing's clear full of sand. Looks like somebody sat it at the beach. Let's see if I can see some of the sand. You can see a little bit of the sand there. Some of it there. It's everywhere. Naturally, you can tell I work in the photography business. I have my little Canon video recorder here on my plastic tripod, but it's going to get the job done. Okay, so let's try some more. I've talked to a few of you guys. Naturally, I don't think you can see my face in this video, which is probably a good thing. I've talked to a bunch of you guys about cleaning them real quick, and I've told you, brake cleaner. I use parts wash, brake cleaner, whatever you can get that'll clean the rails. It just cleans the dirt and the oil out of them, and then you'll want to wipe them down with some lacquer thinner when you're done. So usually I would slide the bearing off of here, but this thing's so dirty I don't even want to run the bearing across there, simply because it could damage the wheels, it could damage the track. So I'm gonna try to get some of the dirt off before I try taking it out. So just kind of hose that thing down in there. I don't know if you can hear that. The amount of dirt. If your slider ever gets this dirty, I suggest you clean it there. Don't let the camera operator slide this thing back and forth and grind that dirt. These at least try to clean it real quick. The problem being is I will insert some pictures that I just took some still pictures of close-ups of all the dirt and how dirty the bearing tracks really are. I mean, it's amazing that this thing was even working. So anyway, what I will do, these things, the bearing wheels, there's actually sealed bearings inside of it, so you don't want to soak them in lacquer thinner or any kind of cleaner, because you'll take the grease out of the bearings and then naturally you'll ruin them. So let's try some of this brake cleaner. I think I'm still taking the oil out of the bearings. We're going to have to put more in it. If you have any cuts on your fingers, you're going to find them really quick when you use this stuff, because it's going to burn. There's little pads on here, little oiling pads that are on here. Just be careful not to pull those out. Otherwise you're going to have to try to weasel them back in there. Probably should have brought another can of stuff. Yeah, see, these bearings are dry. I didn't want them to be dry, but I guess they are. I've got no oil left in them. When you blow these bearings off, don't blow the wheels and spin them because they're dry, there's no oil, and you'll ruin them in a second. What ended up blowing off is just this little cover that went on there. Realistically, this kind of cleaning, if you don't take it out in the desert and get it full of sand, this kind of cleaning could be maybe once a year. You should take it apart. Take it apart once a year. It'd only take you half an hour or something in your garage at your shop, and clean it and make sure it's all good. The way you would put oil in there, I'm going to put some gear oil in there. This just happens to be some I got laying around here. Let's try this. I'm just going to dump a little gear oil right on the top of that bearing, and it's going to make a mess, but it's just the way I do things. And once you dump it on the top, it'll soak down into the wheel, and I'm going to take and spin it a little bit too. It's just some 90 weight gear oil, and then just spin the bearings. And what it'll do is you'll see the oil. The oil will start to go down into the bearing, and you'll know it's down in there. Besides, the wheels will be a lot smoother. They won't sound like they're dry anymore. Because they are a bearing, they need oil, so these ones down here on the end don't seem to be taking it. But you just sit here and spin it for a minute, let it soak for a second, and that oil will run right down through that bearing, all on the inner race and the outer race. Because if not, you run those bearings dry and they're done. I'm going to actually put a little more on there, just because they were so dry. As you can see, it's pretty precise. I build these things so anybody can take them apart, anybody can fix them. There's no rocket science here. I'm going to set these things here. Let them soak for a little bit. Should have got another can of spray. The spray just makes it easier to get all the dirt, oil out of all the cracks. And if any of you have ever cleaned anything, you know exactly what I'm doing. I'm just simply getting all the crap off of it. On the dampener, I would avoid getting a lot of junk on it. You can get the outside of it with some spray, but I just avoid it. Still have to figure out what that clunking noise is. And for the rails, I think I'm just going to use some lacquer thinner since I'm using a lot of that spray and I don't have any more of it left. All you're doing is wiping the rails. It's just a bearing surface. You're wiping all the dirt out of there. Looks to me like he's got a little bit of rust in there from not keeping it oiled. These bearing tracks need to be oiled regularly. It is raw steel. It is a bearing. Oh yeah, no, he's got all kinds of rust, crud. Because basically, if you every time you take this thing out of the case, if you get in the habit, taking a rag, get some little can of oil. Some of the guys use Tri-Flow. Comes in a little bottle. You can get it from the bicycle stores. They use it to lubricate cables with. If you get some of that, and every morning when you take it out of the case, put a couple little drops on just an old t-shirt like rag, move your saddle plate over, oil it, you'll never have a problem, because the bearings have oil pieces on them, but it's not always enough. And that's the only maintenance you need to do. If you want to keep the thing running good, it takes 2 seconds. You take it out of the case, wipe it with a little bit of oil, and it's good to go. Or even what some of the guys will do is take it, it's got a dropper on it, put a couple drops on it, on the track, swish it back and forth, and it's oiled. So I need to find some Scotch-Brite because I need to clean some rust off these bearing tracks, see if we can save them. Okay. Took me a minute to find some. I don't normally use Scotch-Brite on bearing surfaces because it is a bearing. Once you get rust on it, it's like a bearing in your transmission on your car, and you get rust in it, and then the bearings start squealing. Well, on your slider, it's going to start squealing also. So that's, I mean, it's probably the most important thing is to keep them oiled. So I'm going to see if this will take. If it'll take enough of the rust off of it that it doesn't leave it all pitted. Because it's a bearing surface, so it's hard. It's been heat treated. So I'm hoping it'll be okay. A set of rails and a set of bearings on a 4-foot slider run you a little over $500. So it's an expensive mistake if you let them rust. Another thing that I learned too is the cases, the ATA cases, I guess you guys call them, the plywood foam cases that you carry these things in. I noticed the other day on one of my loaners, I had sitting out in my truck, I left it sitting there overnight. It wasn't going to rain. It's California. So it sat in my truck overnight, and in the morning I took it out because I just got it back from loaning it to a guy. And I was going to clean it and check it. And I took it out, and there was all kinds of condensation built up in there. The slider was actually dripping wet. And I didn't realize that I mean, maybe you guys know this and I'm just being stupid about it, but I had never knew that that would cause, that the condensation would get through that case and in on the slider. So, and it wasn't raining, it wasn't a wet morning, so just a word of advice, because naturally if you have your slider sitting in there and the tracks aren't oiled and it's wet and you don't open it and let it dry out, it's going to rust it, and then you're going to be dealing with hopefully cleaning your bearings or buying new bearing tracks. So just a word to the wise. I don't know, I'm going to check into getting some of those packets that that suck up the moisture and start putting them in all my slider cases. But for those of you who already have the cases, you need to check into them or get a hold of me. I'm just going to get them from Uline, the shipping company. They make nice, the big packets, and you just put it in there and let it absorb the moisture. Just kind of reflect it in the light, and you can see down in the groove. Now I have a little jeweler's glass. Let me look down in here and see. It's got a little bit of pits in it, but I'm hoping that it's going to be okay. I really don't want to tell somebody that their slider needs to have bearing tracks put on it. Because naturally I don't make any money off them. I just simply sell them for what I pay for them, because you've already bought the slider. But it just sucks because nobody wants to spend that kind of money. A little bit more gear oil on them bearings and let it soak in there. I'd rather have too much than not enough. So the tracks are clean, but I still need to get down in there. I'm just going to take the air compressor and blow this thing all off. It's got sand everywhere. Okay, now that the air compressor is done running, I have this for bleeding brakes on a mountain bike. I just put a little bit of motor oil in there. I'm going to put it on these little pads, hopefully, as it drips everywhere. Just want it to soak up all this oil on those pads, and those pads are what oils the track. There's little felt pads. It's kind of one of them things you just got to put them on there and let them soak for a minute. I like motor oil just because it's thick and it'll stay there for a while. 3-in-1 oil, all that other stuff will work, it's just kind of thin. Actually, I'm going to use this on the tracks. That's where if you get that, it's a fairly light oil, so it's up to you whether you get a little bottle or whether you get that tri-flow. That tri-flow is good, but it's pretty light. But it's, like I said, if you do this once a year, you're good. unless you take it out in the sand dunes like this guy did. Film in a sandstorm, then you're going to have to take the thing apart. But it's not a car, it's a piece of camera equipment, so it'd be the same way if you took your camera out in the sand, get sand all over in it, you're going to have to take it apart and clean it. Because it's going to let all that bearing, that gear oil run off of the bearing track on the other side. It's just going to let it run out so that it doesn't drip all over in the slider, otherwise you'd be cleaning bearing grease off of, bearing oil off of it for a week. These little caps go on here. There's an arrow for load and then a line. There's a line scribed in the aluminum. The arrow and the aluminum go together. And all that is, it's just a little dust cover. You could actually leave those off if you wanted to, or if you lose them, it's not a big deal. But when it shows load, that means there's two bearings holding it in that direction. The third bearing goes up, which stabilizes it. So if you put it in upside down, naturally then your slider is weighted on one roller, which then you lose a lot of your weight distribution. So you need to pay attention to that when you put it back together. Those arrows need to point down because that's where it's holding the double bearings, got the load on two bearings. You don't necessarily need to wipe the wheels because the wheels are going to run down the oiled track on the edges. Just trying to get a lot of it out of there. It's probably going to ooze oil for a couple hours, so I'm just going to put it on there and then I'll just clean the oil. It's not a big deal. But I'm going to give it one more shot of oil on these wipers. Okay, so then we put them together, set them up. It's nice to put them on 2x4s. Now when you put these things on, like I said, arrows down. Also, it's got these two little spring-loaded Teflon scrapers, scrapes the dirt and crap out of there. Those, you got to press those in to get it in. If you don't, you'll break them off. It's not the end of the world. It'll work just fine without them, but they're there for a reason. So what I do, I just you get it started a little crooked, pushes that other pin down, take this one, kind of wiggle it, you'll feel it go on. It's not that tight. And then when you get to here, a lot of times take a little flat bladed screwdriver, reach in there, pop it up, push this one, it slides in. Might not be any good, makes a little bit of noise. Anyway, we can do the same thing on this side. Once you mess with it, you'll see how it goes in. You just got to be careful. Get that bottom one started first, wiggle it a little bit, and it goes right in. They're pretty noisy. I don't know if this guy might have ruined both of his bearing tracks. I don't supply you with the wrench to adjust these. If you want one, you can call me. I'll send you one for nothing. I kind of don't want people screwing with them. It's how you set your preload. So you loosen it up, the bearing's loose. You tighten it. Tighten it ever so slight just to get it to where it doesn't wiggle. Because if you put too much preload on it, it doesn't roll freely. It's pretty noisy. I don't know. Seems awfully noisy. I'm going to try a different bearing and see if it's the bearing or if it's the track. Feels terrible. You can feel the pits in it. You can feel the bearing grinding. See, and unfortunately, if they had stopped using it when it was windstormed, or maybe right after the windstorm, taken just blew it off. But they probably continued to use it, so that it just barely moves, just ever so slightly when you wiggle it on the wiggle it by the Zerk fittings. If it just barely wiggles. Well, I'm going to put it together and see what the guy says. So all we do is we put the end caps. You grab your 5/16 button heads. When you take it apart, if you keep your end caps on the side where they're supposed to be, the end cap magnets are what's going to determine where your saddle plate is and where your dampener goes. That's the only thing that has to go a certain direction. So, if you leave your end caps on the end that they came off of, you won't have a problem. And once you look at it, you'll be able to figure it out. So now we got magnets on this end. The dampener is always on the opposite side of the magnets. And you can look at your saddle plate, hole for the dampener. Opposite side is the magnets, because you can't put everything on one side. Simple enough. So you could set that here, magnets, magnets, dampener on this side. So I left the dampener all bolted onto it. These are metric screws, metric bolts. Happens to be a 5/32 American fits it. So what I do is I put those in, back them off, run them until they stop, back them off just a quarter of a turn so they're loose. And actually they only go on there one way. The bolts go up to bolt onto here. So you need to keep track of your bolts a little better than I do. I don't know where that one is. It's mixed into the mess on my workbench. Hopefully your workbench is cleaner than mine. Now you got 4 quarter 20 bolts, little stainless washers. If you don't feel like doing this once a year, if you want to send it to me, I'm going to get you for $100. Takes me a little bit to do it. So whether or not you don't want to screw with it or you want me to check it, send it to me. $100, I'll clean it for you. If not, watch the video and do it. That's why I made it, so hopefully you'll do it yourself. That way you don't have to pay me to do it. So what I did, I snugged these up. Now I'm going to the bearing block bolts that we left kind of loose. We went to those. Now I'm going to tighten those up now that everything's kind of located. And those are just small, 5 millimeters, so don't get carried away. Do them up like that. Then what I usually do is I come back and I break one side of these loose. This one I'm going to tighten. I break one side of them loose, and all I do is I kind of line up this edge to make sure it's square. Now that we've tightened up the bottom ones, you loosen this one up, it lets everything relax. See how noisy that thing is? Yep, it should be perfectly silent, so I don't know. I'm going to tell this guy that he needs bearing tracks, and you'll see whether or not he has production pay for it or whether he eats it. So you put the knob in there, you put this little piece back in there, your little handle, by hand. Then I take a pair of pliers, ever so slightly, just give it a little tight, so it's tight, snug. Don't kill it. This here just has to be snug. These are squeaky and dirty. I'm going to put a little bit of oil on them, just a drop. And all of my sliders are, I stand behind them for as long as you own them. If anything breaks or comes apart, if it's workmanship, material or workmanship, I'll fix it for nothing, for as long as you own it. Naturally, you set it out and it gets dirt in the bearing tracks, or you rust the bearing tracks. That's not workmanship. That's your fault, and I won't warranty any of that. But if you know, you strip a bolt or something breaks or comes apart, I'll fix it 100% guaranteed for as long as you own it. Just not neglect. Anyway, that's about as best I can do for the slider. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to set this thing somewhere in my messy shop. When I had a customer take a slider, actually with the older bearing tracks, they took it to Ethiopia and to a bunch of sandy desert areas, and they were filming it strapped to the side of a car. So what we ended up doing, we ended up taking it, spraying lacquer thinner, or spraying cleaner and lacquer thinner on the bearing tracks and taking all the oil off of it, everything clean, dry. Now naturally you can't do that if you're going to be in Louisiana and you're filming where it's moist. They were in the deserts where there was no moisture. So once they took the oil off of it, then the dirt didn't stick to it. So they could film it in a dirty situation or a dirty atmosphere, and nothing got all over it, which worked out really well. They ran it for 100 days of shooting in the desert and never had an issue with it. So something to keep in mind. If you know your slider's going out into the sand dunes, maybe you take an hour, take all the oil off of it, make sure it stays dry, and let them film with it, because then you can simply blow it off. If you get a bunch of sand on it, you can take some canned air, blow the dirt off of it, and it's good. The only downside to it is it's a little bit noisy when it has no oil on it. So, but that's in the occasion that you're filming in the desert in the windstorm, or in the beach. I just figured I would take this thing apart and look at it and see what we got going on. It seems okay. I'm just going to adjust it a little bit. It's got a little spot on it. When it spins, it's got a little tight spot. So basically what it's doing is it's just rubbing the brake or the center hub a little bit. Like I said, I designed it, I machine it, and I assemble each one of them, so it's I kind of know them like the back of my hand. So what you want to do is the solid part here. This part is naturally the springing part that clamps. So this part here that's solid, we just want to move it away from the rotating hub a little bit so that when the hub comes around it doesn't drag, because that's all it was doing. And then when you tighten this, it clamps the top. So the brake still works just fine, it just doesn't rub. Snug these down. Try it, so you know how everything moves good. And then you need to tighten these things pretty good. There again, don't kill it, but tighten them up pretty good so that it doesn't move and start dragging again. Now I think I'm just going to blow it all out and get all the dirt out of there. And really there should be no reason for any dirt to get stuck down in there. There's no oil. It should be dry because you don't want oil around a brake because then it doesn't work. Just get all the dirt off of it. Tighten that up. I don't know where they took this thing at, but it sure... This is a fairly new one. I remember building this not too long ago. They took it somewhere and abused it. Maybe I use this as time to use. A lot of people get these nut busters that I make. They get them in their kits because I sell them with every slider gets a nut buster, and a lot of guys don't even know what they are. So castle nut, when you put this thing on a dolly, put the castle nut nut buster on there and you can hand tighten it and get it tighter than normal. Or if you go back to your 5/16 Allen wrench, which is the same Allen wrench that you'd use to adjust the bottom plate on the slider, put it in the hole, and now what you can do is you can get in there and tighten this thing and tighten it down tight so that you don't get the slider doesn't wiggle, nothing moves. So that's what that's for. Or if you get, let's say you put this thing together and for some reason you're moving it around and the nut gets really tight, you can't get it off. I've heard, I don't work in the business, but I've heard rumors guys taking the rods off of a dolly and smacking the nut trying to get everything loose. You put a nut buster on it, put the Allen wrench in there, and unloosen it. It takes you 2 seconds. So every slider comes with one. This way here, maybe there's some guys out there that don't know what they are. This is what it does. Okay. So that's it. All I got left, actually, is I'll bring this thing back. Like I said, with the amount of oil I put on it, we're going to let it drip for a while, a couple of days. The way you engage the dampener, loosen that up, pull it over till it's tight, tighten up the screws or the bolts, and now it's engaged. You can tell because the wheel will have a little dent in it. Let's see if they've ruined this too. So anyway, that's how you do the bearing or the dampener. I usually ship them unengaged because there's a lot of guys that don't even like using them. Take the bottom plate, kind of find center. That looks like center. Take your 4 bolts with your washers, 3/8/16. And there again, these don't need to be, just make them snug. You don't have to kill them. Like that. Voila, you're done.